Caroline is going to start us off for this session. Caroline is my colleague at McGill University, and she's going to be giving a talk about Madagascar as well. So I'll let you share your title and we'll go from there.
Thank you. Is there a way for me to see the PowerPoint on the computer?
Well, it's a PDF, right? So I think it's...
We just go with the PDF?
They're dual screens, so we could try and mirror it.
But why don't you let Justin do those changes?
Then you
Sure.
Position your chair.
All right.
So you can
So, yeah.
All right.
Just, I guess, tell me when you want a change.
Okay. We'll see your Word document.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you everyone, and thank you for coming. I also want to thank the organizers of this conference, Professor Scott, Professor Jamadi, Justin and Sophie and Emma. They're incredible.
And you're one of the organizers.
Yeah,
We
yes.
gotta thank you.
By default. Yeah.
She's done a tremendous amount of work planning as well. So we should acknowledge
and
that.
thanks to Stephen also. So my work focuses, I don't have a lot of time, but my work really dovetails off of Lala Nirena's work in terms of looking at mining corporations in Madagascar. But I'm more interested in the ways in which these mining corporations are latching on to conservationist narratives and this idea of the green economy. In French we would say l'économie verte. So I have some pictures here, so Rio Tinto made these partnerships with several conservation NGOs, including Kew Botanical Gardens. Also on the Ambatabi project, that was actually a site, a pilot site for business and biodiversity offsets. And Lala already mentioned with the concept of offsets, and the concept is basically you destroy in one location and you save in another location. So you destroy biodiversity here, but you save it somewhere else, and it's offsettable. Now, Madagascar is an interesting place for this kind of concept because it's become sort of a testing grounds for the green economy and this offset ideology. Rio Tinto actually coined the term net positive impact on biodiversity. So the idea that you can destroy X amount of biodiversity and create metrics to value that biodiversity in a certain way. It's very quantifiable, but it's not qualifiable in the sense in which people are somehow disconnected from, the social aspect is not included in those metrics. So that's the more or less the subject of what I'm working on. So the big question is then for business, how can we get developers to pay for conservation because it's in our business interest? So it's also a language of best practice, and I know that we've heard this language also in the ICA consortium. So language and narratives are of quite a lot of importance within the context of these mining conservation partnerships. So biodiversity offsets. Okay, so let's say that this bottle of water belongs to Justin, and it's his bottle of water. He's very attached to it. He needs water for life, right? And then I come and I take it. Yeah, sorry, I have to. And so I just drink the whole thing, glug, glug, glug. And I say, don't worry, I'm going to give this bottle of water to the other Caroline. And it's fine. It's an offset. It's offsettable. So the idea is that you disconnect people from their social and environmental relationships. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you can continue. So this is actually a market-oriented mechanism, biodiversity offsets. There are actually biodiversity banks that exist in Madagascar and outside of Madagascar. So it's kind of like a trading system where, I need these kinds of credits for mountains, I need some credits for for water or for wetlands, and actually all of this concept is based in wetlands banking, which originated in the United States, but it's become, again, Madagascar has really become the testing grounds for these kinds of concepts. So I did some research, yeah, and I really tried to understand how people were valuing their environment just outside of the mining zones. So I did long-term research. I worked in rice fields. I really tried to understand the question of value. How are we valuing nature within these market-oriented schemes, right? So this slide is important within the CICADA context, I think, because a lot of people have been asking, why are there so many Canadian mining companies now coming into Africa? And it actually happened within a policy framework during the Stephen Harper regime, we can say that, where CICADA, the Center for Environmental Development, was actually dissolved into DFATE, the Department for Foreign Trade and Affairs. So suddenly mining became synonymous with development. So there was this sort of turn towards mining-led sustainable development. So there were policy frameworks involved. So this is, Professor Scott mentioned this before, this is the Environmental Justice Atlas, and focusing on Madagascar. These are all of the projects that are existing now that are either land grabbing projects or resource extractive projects. And so I focus mostly on the Ambatuvi project and Rio Tinto project. Just here. It's a really great resource for understanding globally how environmental justice is being implemented or not. So again, the two sites of my field research. So, all right, so bear with me here. Rio Tinto, multinational mining corporation based in, it's a UK-Australian conglomerate. Now, they acquired Alcan in 2007 for a lot of money, and they started implementing all of these sustainability kind of initiatives in Montreal, where Alcan also has a major base. So one of those programs was the Bixi Bike program, and Rio Tinto was one of the founders of the Bixi Bike program. So I'm really interested in the idea of the idea of the gift. Like, is development a gift? And how might these gifts of the Bixi Bike be also kind of depoliticizing at the same time the activities of this mining corporation in the global south? And you get on that bike, can you, and oh, sorry, that was a gift also, it was my chicken, Belina, different gift.
Not from Rio Tinto.
No, that was just from the villagers. Yeah, that's
CSR.
so again, like, I'm interested in the concept of aesthetics, and not aesthetics in this sort of like, we look at these images and we think of something, right? But I'm interested in the idea of aesthetics as sense perception. So those Bixi bikes, when you get on one of them, you ride around town, you feel the wind through your hair and your face, and you don't really realize that this is also a depoliticizing object, possibly, you know. So Rio Tinto Alcan Planetarium, they've acquired the planetarium, the jazz festival. There are these, what I call in an article that I wrote, performances of sustainability. So again, I think we need to really take very consciously the fact that Rio Tinto, Shell, BP, all came together in 1999 to forge the Global Mining Initiative. And after that, there was a whole swarm of different initiatives that came from that. including the, the acronyms that Elaine and I just went through: the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, the MMSD, the Mining, Minerals and Sustainable Development Initiative, the ICMMN, International Council on Mining and Minerals. All of this has in common the concept of sustainability, right? So in 1999, the concept of sustainability and sustainable development was consciously adopted by a consortium of mining corporations that got together, realizing that access to land was becoming more and more difficult, and so sustainability was what was adopted. And so then there was also a production of knowledge. So we were talking about knowledge production. So in this case, these mining companies are also producing scientific knowledge. This is just another image. So if we were thinking about aesthetics and the ways in which these things are moving forward, we can also think about the concept of natural capital. Natural capital is also another market-based mechanism, which essentially puts a monetary value on nature. And I'm still, navigating this in my PhD research, but I just want to make clear that these things are moving forward rather quickly. And I need to move forward rather quickly. So in some of my analysis is the mimesis of conservation. So on the top you have Rio Tinto's image of a small sapling, and on the bottom you have WWF. They look almost identical. So there's also kind of like a mimesis of conservation that's happening. And so these images were all provided by Rio Tinto. In the biodiversity book, Rio Tinto carried out an inventory of all of the biodiversity that they were going to destroy, and then created a scientific publication inventorying all of the biodiversity that was going to be lost. And they are also using these offsets so they can say, okay, we are producing scientific knowledge about the biodiversity that we are destroying, but in another part of Madagascar, we're going to save such biodiversity. Yeah. So we have different forms of mediation that are kind of pointing more towards a direction of more of a Western-based environmental ethic. But I want to get a little bit further. So the other side of the story is a degradation narrative. It's actually using a narrative that, oh, well, this forest would have been destroyed anyway in 20 years. And that was actually documented in some of the articles that were published by Rio Tinto or QMM. So this is a little chart that I created just to show the power of language and media in kind of convincing people of how local populations might be vilified on the one hand using a certain type of language, whereas the mining corporation is actually saving nature at the same time. So the argument I'm trying to advance in this short period of time is that some of these companies are coming in using a green degradation narrative in order to save, to conserve, to save and destroy at the same time. So these are just some more images about the lemur bridges, for example. There's a big open pit nickel mine, Lala Nirina already spoke about it. These bridges are actually like infrastructure for lemurs, but the open pit mine actually has prohibited people from actually accessing nature and using like the pathways within the forest that they use to access each other's villages. 2 villages have been displaced by this mine, and 6,000 hectares have been destroyed by the Rio Tinto mines. So, in terms of the ICA consortium and what we're trying to do with research, the big question is here, and I probably won't I certainly won't get to the end of my slides. What kind of conservation does this look like? I'm talking about a market-based type of conservation, and we already heard about fortress conservation where it's all off limits, which then went to a flexible conservation, which is like community-based, and that's also been criticized. And that now is becoming like a fictitious conservation, which was a term coined by Bram-Buescher. So the question is, if we destroy here and we save there, are we going back to a fortress conservation model where some communities that have nothing to do with the mine in this location are being dispossessed in another location? So that would be a question that I would like to ask everyone else. And since I only have 30 seconds left, I will not, that's me harvesting rice, and that's all.
Questions for Caroline? I might ask one off the, oh, here we go. I'm interested in the aesthetics side of things that you're talking about, and I was reading through Igoe's paper on the spectacle of nature, IGO, and some work in visual environmental communication. And I was thinking, are these photographers, do you think, contracted by the companies to go in and take these photos with this particular mindset in mind? Or are they kind of peripherally engaged in the sense that maybe they are wildlife photographers or they are landscape photographers, professionals who are really focused on the aesthetics of their image but not necessarily the politics surrounding the way they construct their frames, and then maybe they upload it to, say, Getty Images, and then from there, with a Creative Commons license, the mining companies then take images and repackage them and appropriate them in various ways.
No, I think that these images are all copyrighted by the company. I wouldn't have any doubt about that. Maybe Stephen could jump in. But the main argument I'm trying to make here is that there's an inclusiveness of conservation within corporations, within mining corporations, and that this is very, we've been discussing IUCN, the ICA consortium, the involvement of private corporations. So I think we also need to realize that these actors are there, but there's also a consciousness to that presence, right? So for the aesthetics, I think that media, if we can think of aesthetics in terms of media, that's a very key way in which these companies are advancing their access to land. And if I could just give a very short example, Rio Tinto, actually, while they were destroying the forest, this very highly biodiverse forest, they were collecting seeds along the way, very biodiverse seeds, to the littoral forest near Fort Dauphin. And they collected these seeds and sent them to Kew Botanical Gardens, which has the like a Noah's Ark of biodiversity at the Millennium Seed Bank project. So collecting these seeds, destroying and saving at the same time, it's as though this genetic diversity becomes heritage that's being saved by a multinational mining corporation that then sends these seeds to England, for example, to be saved. So that would be an example of the ways in which this mediation and aesthetics might be working.
Just want to add comment.
Sure, we'll go to Lala. Yeah.
I just want to add comment on what is Caroline proposed. Like, these aesthetics, the community of Madagascar was there, and this environment was there for years, for centuries. But then when companies come, the corporations come, they took these nice photos. You know? It's like a justification for them to come and they say, this is so nice, and if you leave it there, it will be destroyed by these villagers who has nothing to do with, nothing how to mitigate or how to replace. But we know that we have the means. And this is just a justification used by the corporation to grab all of the land and the ecosystem and everything. And then, as I say, at the beginning or initially, Madagascar was more, more focused on species because of these aesthetics, this aesthetic argument. All thus the Madagascar conservation was species focused rather than anything else. Then, let's say, by beginning of 2000, they started to think the human factors and to integrate the human in this. But earlier was just species, nice biodiversity. Wow, we are rich and we have. So these photos are not only the corporation, like NGOs, they took a lot of lemurs and everything, like flowers and wild animals to attract. This is also one of their way to get funding from donors to make the conservation of such type of species, So they need to make a nice photo.
So just to make one comment on that, and I will make it very brief. It's just an example because I didn't give very many examples here. One example in terms of the Rio Tinto mine in the southeast, in Fort Dauphin, Rio Tinto created a dam which cut off access, which basically, the river, cut off access of the salt water from entering an otherwise estuarine environment. And I did research among the local populations that were living outside of this estuary system. And all of the fish died off in this system. And then the company used a narrative to say that these fishing populations were already degrading the fishing system in that area. And then the company introduced sustainable nets, which had larger holes in them. And the only fish that could access that estuarine system were the tiny ones that could get through a small hole in the dam. So I know that that's not very well explained, and it's like maybe 6 slides later, but this is just an example to show that there's a certain irony with green mining. Companies are at the same time using a sustainability narrative and actually implementing it, but the impacts of the mine are inverted, they're turned upside down, where people who are experiencing a major environmental impact of a mine are at the same time being forced to adopt conservation activities, even if their resources are already gone. So that's one of the points I wanted to make.
I think Colin had a question, and Marco, and someone in the back as well. Sure. Okay, Marco, you had one, and Caroline as well.
Okay, I really appreciate your presentation because very clearly show the contradiction which is contained in a concept like green economy. And we very well know this is a narrative which is constructed, and that narratives work on rhetorical devices. And I very much appreciated Ashish Kotari's recent paper that defined this as oxymoric expression, because green and economy cannot go together. They are contrasting concepts, fundamentally and ontologically different, whereas one leads to a concept of development which is based on economics and which has to do with the exploitation and uncontrolled exploitation, as you show very well. And the second term leads to the idea of environment, and is based, rooted in the science, in the life science, where humankind is seen in entirely different ways. It is seen as part and taking life from what he has around it. So I think this is the contradiction that your work is taking, is showing the contradiction in a clear way. This is what I liked. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcus.
Carolyn, you had a comment and then one thing.
Just maybe a little not a clarification, but maybe you can just expand a little bit, because you said at one point that as mining corporations found it more and more difficult to access lands to mine, then came this sustainability narrative or this concept into their work. And that seemed to work. Why does it work?
Well,
How does it translate into actually getting more access to land?
Well, there were several different organizations or institutions that were formed after the GMI, the Global Mining Initiative. So over the past 10 to 15 years, there really has been a change, and the conservationists have gotten on board. So what I study really is mining conservation partnerships. And it's not to say that the conservationists have bad intentions, it's just that this is a phenomenon that's happening. But we need to know about this phenomenon that when I started doing my research on Rio Tinto, this had not really started happening in the way it is now. And there were dissenters. Conservation International, for example, was very against the mine in the Rio Tinto mine, and WWF also. But when these partnerships started forming, that dissenting voice in the media that was being produced just disappeared, you know? So I think there's also something about that I'm trying to get at with the aesthetics, the lack of the power of media in convincing, and also the institutional frameworks within which these mining conservation partnerships are occurring. Super interesting.
There was one question at the end then.
My name is Elaine. I've infiltrated from the other side. But yeah, I think your research is so interesting, Caroline. I wanted to ask you especially about the aesthetic thing. Like if you're looking at some of the different aesthetics coming from different communicators and audiences. So looking at the businesses, are they changing the aesthetics when they're dealing with the international community, the international conservation community, and then when they go local to the communities that they're impacting or interacting with, does that aesthetic change? Because maybe the viewer or the receiver has a different aesthetic. And then on the other side, are the communities, are they using a particular aesthetic in terms of like the art renaissance, you know, like are they now coming back with a different kind of, you know, type of aesthetic and is that reaching the corporations or even the conservation communities?
Yeah, I think that's a really wonderful question. And I think it like really frames this whole conference in certain ways, because even indigenous could be a certain type of aesthetic that's mobilized in certain ways through media to reach certain people. The way I'm looking at aesthetics is more in terms of the Aristotelian root of aesthesis, so sense perception itself. And I think that sense perception is not the same everywhere. So, you know, I had one slide on the rap guide to wilderness. I think that you were there in Sydney. And one of the songs that they were using to convince people to save nature was using really Western environmental ethic, you know. Walden Pond was the name of the rap song. So that's also a type of aesthetics. On a local level, I think aesthesis is more of what I'm trying to get at, so sense perception itself.
Great.
I have more to say, but I'm just thinking too much, so.
Wait, you had a quick comment, Mom?
Yes, no, I just have questions because, as I say, this is for me a first time to go in your topic and your field. That's very, very interesting. And when I heard the last comment about green economy, It's like it's a narrative, and I like the way you interpret and you see this type of words. Now there is I would say there's a trend to go for blue economy. So I just ask how do you mean it? Because Madagascar being an island, so the last year, like the last 12 months, we are talking only about blue economy, and the way they explain it, that we need to make to put an economic value for everything in the sea. That is one of the reasons why they signed this contract, you know. And I don't know if it is that the blue economy, but it is the way they explain. So everything like the mangroves and the reef and everything as blue economy. I don't know.
No, I think that the reason why Madagascar is such an interesting place to study these dynamics is precisely because it's like a testing ground for all of this. Rio Tinto coined the term net positive impact. They formed partnerships with IUCN, Conservation International, WWF, Kew Botanical Gardens, BirdLife International. I can go on, but it's probably really boring to do. But
Actually, it's very
I mean, Conservation International has a partnership with Monsanto, you know, but everyone knows about that. So, anyway, that's all this about the blue economy. This is happening. Marine protected areas, I mean, they're very deeply embedded in this. There are some NGOs like Blue Ventures and even Reef Doctor that are experimenting with something called population offsets. Population offsets are basically sort of linked within like a family planning initiative into marine conservation zones, where it's sort of like a neo-Malthusian idea. I don't know enough about it, but when Rio Tinto coined the term net positive impact, they actually also were advancing cultural heritage offsets. So what's really interesting to me is this, how far can we take this offset ideology? How far can we take this thinking of that, you know, we can, you know, put cultural heritage in a box in a museum somewhere because we have to mine there, and how far can we take this type of thinking? What is it? Is it capitalism? Is it neoliberalism? I don't know, but who really cares? Because these people living on the ground are still losing access to their land, and they're in deep poverty. And Madagascar is a highly indebted poor country. I
think we might have to wrap up, Sophie's. We're at 12 o'clock, so we're going to run into lunch. Is the only thing.
One last short question.
One last short. Yeah. I know John and Colin had a point too. Okay. Michael, you want to have the last word?
Okay, thank you. He's offered me his chance. When Karen, I've seen you make this presentation before. It's always, you know, the new insights every time you make it. And what goes on in my mind when you're talking about all this is the message of David Cotton's book, When Corporations Rule the World. Mm-hmm. It's like when corporations rule the world, then first you decouple people from nature. If you want to then use to trade in nature, you have to decouple it from people, so that you just see nature.
Exactly.
And then you make nature into a tradable item. Mm-hmm. And to do that, you have to move people as far away from it as possible.
Yeah.
And then you create these frameworks that facilitate that.
Fictitious conservation.
So it's amazing.
Yes, that's exactly what I feel as well. It's a decoupling of social and environmental systems. So that's what I think we all need to keep in mind when we talk about collaborations between ICA and research communities, that this is happening. I've been involved with IUCN for a long time, and I've seen it happening. I'm also the deputy chair of the CISP business and best practice and accountability wing. So we can all discuss further if you're interested in learning more about that too. Thank you very
Great.
much.
Thank you, Karen.